Everybody, I'm Mike Kasmer. Today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Orbea Rallon RS. It's this bike right here. Now last year, if you recall, Orbea had a really good season. They launched their downhill bike, the Rayon DH, and that racked up some victories on the World Cup circuit. And they also released the enduro version of the same bike, and that received our Bike of the Year title here at Pinkbike. So things are off to a good start. And now what Orbea has decided to do is make an electrified version of that bike. But they took things in a different direction. These days, it seems like when e-bikes are launched, it's all about the max amount of torque, max amount of watts to just rock you up the hill as fast as possible. This bike does not do that. In fact, Orbea put in TQ's HPR 40 motor, a motor that's typically found on road and gravel bikes. And yes, if you're not familiar, there are electric road and gravel bikes. So this is a mountain bike. And it has a very small motor, a pretty small battery, 290 watt hours. And Orbea says that it's designed to be a more rider-focused machine rather than a motor-focused machine. So it may seem kind of different, but essentially this motor only puts out 40 Newton meters of torque and a maximum of 200 watts. So the feel on the trail isn't like you're getting shoved up the hill or dragged up the hill. It's very subtle, just a little bit more assistance. We'll get into more of the details, but this is not a high-powered, super crazy fast e-bike. It's more of a regular mountain bike with a little bit of subtle assistance. It's a distinction I'll dive into more shortly, but worth keeping in mind. Let's start with the very basics. Essentially, same travel, same geometry as the Rayon Enduro. So you got a 180 mil fork up front, 170 millimeters of rear travel. You have mixed wheels, although you have the possibility of running dual 29-inch wheels if you like by swapping out the carbon upper link. And geometry, like I said, pretty similar. You get a 64-ish head tube angle. There's a headset adapter that you can use to change the head angle. You have a high and low position for the bottom bracket, and the chainstay sits at 445 millimeters across all sizes. The reach is 478 millimeters on the large that I've been riding, and seat-tube angle, quite steep, around 79 degrees. So you've got that modern enduro geometry, pretty tall stack, pretty upright position. And there's a reason we really liked it, and that Rayon Enduro bike does a good job of getting you top of steep climbs and down steep descents. Now it's time to get into some of the details that set this bike apart. It's really what Orbea was focused on. They wanted to have things talk with each other, something that doesn't always happen in the bike industry. You get suspension from one company, drivetrain from another, a motor from another, and a lot of times there's no communication. Lots of them have different batteries, even different types of batteries. But the case of the Rayon RS, Orbea was able to integrate it all. So you have one main battery, and tied to that battery is the shock, the dropper post, and the remote. They're all wired in, so there's no additional things to charge at the end of your ride. Just plug it in, everything gets charged at once. So essentially, this bike can be set so that when your seat post is lowered, the suspension opens up. Nice and supple, absorbs all the bumps while you're going downhill. You raise the seat again, it firms up. It can do that automatically. So there's really not a lot of thinking that the rider needs to do. You can just ride along, and your bike is adjusting itself to the terrain. Now, whether that's necessary or if you want that in your day-to-day riding life, that's kind of a different topic. But I will say that it does work well. It gives this bike very efficient pedaling performance and excellent descending performance. Again, we'll get into that a little more detail pretty soon, but everything's talking together and it's pretty neat. And you can also tune it as well. Fox, for this Neo X2, they've got an app that allows you to select different suspension tunes, essentially, kind of really customize it for a way that you like to ride and the terrain that you're on. You also have 3 different motor modes. There's Ultra, Range, and Rally. Ultra is actually the least amount of power, just a subtle bit of assistance. Range a little bit more, Rally a little bit more. Again, those are all tunable in the TQ app. And eventually, if not by the time you're watching this, Orbea is going to have their own app and you can kind of access everything in there. It's a lot of tech stuff. It can seem overwhelming, but luckily, you don't really need to worry much about it. If you're someone that wants to just hop on a ride, you can do that too and not really need to fuss around with very much at all. Really simple remote to use on the left-hand side of the bike. 2 buttons to change the modes. A long press on the lower button gets you into the suspension mode setting. There's 3 different suspension modes you can choose from. And other than that, battery indicators at the top. You got 5 buttons, and there's another LED light that shows you which motor mode you're in. So pretty intuitive, and the amount of technology behind this is immense, but the amount of effort it takes to understand it isn't that much. So that's the good news. So a lot of electronics, a lot of talking together. How does this thing actually ride? Because it is a bike, you're supposed to ride it. We'll start with the climbing. it's an e-bike, but it doesn't feel like an e-bike. And that's kind of the thing that's going to be a little bit hard for many riders to wrap their brains around. I went out on a ride with this and I decided to start the day. Well, let's back up a little bit. How much does this thing weigh? 40 pounds. And 40 pounds and 2 ounces, including the water bottle cage. So let's call it 40 pounds. I've reviewed enduro bikes in the last couple of years that weigh the same exact amount, and those didn't have a motor and they didn't have a battery. So very impressive weight. So you got that weight. I decided on one of my rides to just start the day with the motor off. Just ride it like a normal bike. Pedaled away, did about 2,500 vertical feet of climbing on the bike with the motor off. And then I finished that lap and decided, let's ride some more. Turn the motor on, a little treat for myself. Enjoy the motor assist. Turned it on and started pedaling, and it wasn't that different. It was different, and you do notice that there's a motor, but the amount of assistance is pretty subtle. I think the analogy that I came up with is that each of the 3 modes, it's almost like knocking 3 to 4 pounds off the weight of the bike. So if you're in the least assistance, it makes it feel like it's a 37-pound bike. Knock 3 more pounds off that. Feels like a 34-pound bike. 3 more pounds off that, 31. So, in the easiest setting, it really just feels like you're riding a lighter trail bike, which is pretty cool because, this thing is a burly 170 mil travel enduro bike, just smashed in the descent. So you can make it feel like your trail bike, but the difference is more like what you experience if you swapped out some downhill casing tires for some cross-country tires. Noticeable for sure, but it's not that dramatic effect that you feel like even if you hopped on, say, the Orbea Wild or a new Bosch or Avanox motor-equipped bikes, where those bikes just chuck you up the hill super fast. You can just do lap after lap. They're shuttle truck replacements, essentially. This is not a shuttle truck replacement. And that's something that's going to be hard for people to come to terms with, especially because it's so expensive. I mean, it's $15,000 for this thing as it sits. And there's a cheaper version that costs $11,000 or maybe $10,199 that loses the electronic suspension component. So super expensive and pretty underpowered. So yeah, it's a little bit of a conundrum as far as positioning when you climb. Great position, really upright. It's that 79-degree seat tube angle. Some riders might even need to slide the seat backwards on the rails, which isn't something that you typically need to do, but it is quite upright. But the front end is really tall too, so that helps make sure there's not too much weight on your wrists. If you just steepen the seat tube angle of a bike and you don't do anything with the front end, it can feel like you're just hunched over and almost doing a push-up. With this bike, you're just sitting there almost like a beach cruiser, which for climbing up steep ascents is pretty nice. Pedaling performance, I mentioned it's got that electronic suspension. It's as firm as you want it to be. So you can have it almost fully locked out when you're climbing and it will open up if you hit bigger bumps, or you can have it kind of somewhere in the middle, a little more subtle, or you can have it, fully open if you want it as well. So efficiency, it's as efficient as it can be. So it does a good job with that. And that also helps preserve the geometry when you're climbing. So you kind of don't feel like you're mushing up and down all that travel. The suspension isn't tied to the fork, so that stays open, but I've never really felt the need for a fork lockout on any modern bike. So you might as well have that absorbing some bumps. The back end stays efficient. Final bit of climbing. How does it feel if you're getting into some really technical bits? It's a big bike, but it's not too hard to handle, and you do have that extra motor assistance. I was able to get up some fairly steep techie climbs, and it just kind of you feel the motor the more effort you put in. So if you're really cranking down, that's when it's kind of starting to give you that helping hand. You're not going to get up anything you probably couldn't get up with a regular bike, though. It doesn't have that massive watt or torque of the full power bikes like I mentioned. Oh, there's one final note, something I do need to talk about. This motor, it only has a single clutch design rather than a dual clutch. And so that means that your chainring is mounted to your cranks, which is cool if you do need to lube the chain, pedal it backwards, chain goes backwards. Not something that happens on most e-mountain bikes. The downside is that if you're in rolling terrain and say you take like a half pedal and the motor kicks in and you are stopped pedaling, you can feel that in your feet. It almost feels like the nastiest pedal kickback you've ever experienced. Now, Orbea is aware of that, and they've come up with a tune, basically a mode that when the dropper post is lowered, it'll cut that assistance. So you won't feel that if the dropper post is lowered and if you enable that setting. But if you do have the seat post up, just you're on a mellower traverse and hit some chunky bits and you do that little half pedal and that motor engages, it can feel pretty disconcerting. It's almost like you're on a fixed gear bike doing a skid stop. You just feel that pressure on your feet. It's pretty strange. I mean, descending, I made sure that I almost always had the assistance turned off just in order to not experience that sensation, because it's really weird. So I kind of wish that this had a dual clutch style, something you'd find on that more powerful HPR 60 motor. because that is a downside. It's not the best feeling when you're in kind of like rolling terrain with the seat up. So something to note. And again, it does go away if you turn the motor off, but it's an e-bike, and I don't know, if it doesn't feel like you should have to turn the motor off all the time, but you kind of do with this thing. So that's a downside. But if you are just going up a hill, down the other side, you probably won't even notice it. All right, climbing out of the way, descending. Yeah, it's so good. I mean, there's a reason that this bike won our mountain bike of the year last year, because it's very good. They've got the geometry dialed, I'd say, for what people are looking for in a modern enduro bike. And that tall front end makes a huge difference. You're just looking ahead. Your hands are out in front of you. Your feet are nice and low and centered. Chainstay length is moderately long, 445 millimeters. You kind of get that carving sensation that I've talked about before, kind of similar to that Raw Madonna, a bike that I really like. And when you can carve a bike, you don't need to make any dramatic front end movements. You just kind of tip it and it just hooks in. It's so fun to ride. I would say this is one of the best descending mountain bikes I've been on in the last few years, because it's great. But the thing is, I just kept wondering, well, why don't I just have a regular Rayon? So we'll get into that more in a bit. But if you have had the chance to ride the Rayon enduro bike or even the downhill bike, the similarities, the carryover, it's here. And this maintains that just excellent level of descending ability. Suspension does a good job. It's kind of nice having that 180 fork up front. You know, enduro bikes shrunk a little bit. It seemed like they all started coming to 170 forks, but the 180, you can just smash through some stuff, feel good about it. Good amount of support. I've ridden the Rayon downhill bike, and that bike, you know, if you don't, you got to kind of really play with it to get to sit a little bit higher in its travel. This one has that out of the box, which is what Matt Beer also found when he reviewed the Rayon enduro bike. Just has more support, and it gives you a nice platform to push against. Super impressed with how this bike descends, and part of that is because Orbea didn't need to compromise their positioning of the main pivot or anything like that, because the motor takes up so little room. They were able to really preserve what they unlocked with the Rayon enduro bike. And that's kind of the main takeaway. Is this made me want to get my hands on the regular Rayon enduro bike. But yeah, it's kind of a confusing bike. Who is this bike for? I don't really know. It's an impressive project, and Orbea is honest about it. They know they tackled this project. They're not trying to sell thousands and thousands of these. They're doing it almost as a proof of concept of what they can do by getting different companies to actually talk with each other and create products that communicate, you know, so you can have things connected. Use a level of interconnectivity that we don't usually see on bikes. And hopefully it's a sign of things to come. You know, I think there's room for improvement on e-bikes and even regular bikes. If you imagine one battery that works for your dropper post and your derailleur, that'd be crazy, right? So there's some things there that I'm a fan of, but I think that they kind of shot themselves in the foot by going with that TQ HPR 40 motor. It just doesn't have enough power, at least for what I'm looking for if I'm going to be on an e-bike. The HPR 60 motor, which is the mid-power motor, you find that on the Trek/Plus or the Yeti MTE. Those bikes, I really like how they feel. They kind of strike that middle ground where you know you're on an e-bike, but you're just not getting yanked up the hill, and the bikes tend to be a bit lighter. So I'd rather take the weight penalty and potential design concessions of the HPR 60 on this bike rather than needing to deal with the HPR 40. It's kind of unfortunate because there's so much potential here, but just doesn't quite at least scratch the itch that I would think most riders want when they're purchasing an e-bike. The range of that small battery, it's pretty impressive. I was able to get in a 6,000 vertical foot ride the other day, about 30 miles, kind of using all three modes, but big solid ride, and I didn't run out of any battery. But again, it didn't really feel that much like I was on an e-bike. So I don't know. This bike makes me scratch my head more than most. The main takeaway, descends very well. It's very expensive and probably a bit underpowered, but it could be a sign of things to come. I think there is a lot of potential, and it's going to be cool to see where Orbea takes in the future, how everything talks together. You know, maybe their next version of their Wild, their full-powered e-bike, I would assume it's going to have this dropper post that is connected into the main battery, and the communication between all that stuff. It's pretty neat to see. That's the Orbea Rallon RS. I know that was a lot. I feel like I might have spoken pretty quickly. I apologize, but there's a lot to talk about here, and I was trying to get it all out. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. And is this a bike that appeals to you? I do feel like we should actually, before I finish this up, who is this bike for? I think it could be for somebody that wants to ride with their kid. You know, it's almost I don't want to call it a dad bike because someone's going to, I don't know, make fun of something. But if you were somebody that has a Grom that has gotten really fast and you want to keep up with them, but you don't want to be on a full powered e-bike, you know, you still want to work out when you get out there, this could work for that. You know, I could see that being the kind of dad Grom, dad or mom, and the Grom equalizer a bit. Could also be for somebody that just wants to feel, have a little extra feeling of fitness, but they don't want to give into the full power e-bike. You still want to work out. You still want it to feel like you're on a normal bike. You don't want something that's super heavy or just blasting around at turbo speed everywhere. This will do that. But again, I feel like you could almost just get the regular Rayon. You can build that thing up to be about 35 pounds. It'd be 5 pounds lighter than this, and it would feel the same, and you wouldn't have to plug it in. Yeah, man, this bike, it's just, I don't know. Let us know what you think in the comments. Is this a bike for you? Are you excited about the future? You just want to get rid of all these electronics and just go back to the olden days, full analog? I don't know. I'll probably sneak in a couple more rides on this thing because it descends so well. But I don't think I'll keep it along for the long term just because I'd rather just ride a bike without a motor in this instance. Lots more to come. Thanks for watching. Thanks for putting up with my rambling. Catch y'all next time.